This Lent, we are inviting people to give things up, not as a way of feeling deprived or sacrificial, but as a way of opening ourselves up to the kind of lives that we want to live, the kind of lives that God wants for us. And this week, our Sunday theme is giving up complaining. In preparation for this morning's sermon, I've been trying to give up complaining all week since last Sunday. And it's been an eye-opening experience. The first thing I discovered is that I am not alone in my propensity to complain. When you're trying to give something up, it's amazing how much you notice, not only yourself when you're doing it, but how much other people do it as well. And many of us complain a whole lot. Whether it's complaining about the referee's calls in an Olympic hockey game, or the annoying habits of our coworkers, or the pain in our back, or the weather, or the way the dishes and the clothing always seem to pile up. Complaining comes easily to many of us. And complaining has also been around for a very long time. Consider the story that Lasha just read from the Hebrew Scriptures about the people of Israel in the desert. God, with the help of Moses, Miriam, and Aaron, has just rescued the people from slavery in Egypt, where things were horrible. Yet less than 2 months later, they are complaining in the wilderness. Why didn't God let us die in the comfort of Egypt, where we had lamb stew and all the bread we could eat? God, you brought us out here to the wilderness to starve us to death. The whole company, we're all going to die. Well, I think there's a little bit of selective memory going on here. You see, they were not well treated in Egypt. Some of you might remember the story of Moses in the bulrushes. Moses' mother saved her baby boy by floating him in a little homemade boat on the river until he was found by Pharaoh's daughter. And why did she do that? Well, because Pharaoh had ordered all of the baby boys to be massacred. So things were not good in Egypt. I'm not even sure they were well fed. But because conditions in the desert are not going so well, the Hebrew people grumbled at God. And the good news is that God's response to them is not, okay, well then, if you don't need my help, handle this yourself, I give up on you. Because that would be my response to such ingratitude. But God is much more patient and forgiving than I am. God actually sends them food to meet their needs. God listens and responds to their complaints. This was very reassuring to me this week as I tried to give up complaining and realized how much I really do complain. I was stunned by how much money I was putting into my complaint jar, because I said I would put 25 cents every time I complained in my head and $1 every time I complained to someone else. I was trying not to complain, and still I was putting money in the jar. So thank goodness God loves complainers too. Because even if I never manage to give up complaining entirely, which at this moment seems very likely, God is not going to reject me. And that's awesome news indeed. But the biggest consequence of this week was that it left me thinking about what kind of energy I feed. What kind of energy I feed in my life, and what kind of energy I put out into the world. If I don't want to be a complainer, how do I want to be? And that took me to the writings of the Apostle Paul. As a lesbian woman, I have a strained relationship with some of Paul's teachings. Paul's attitude towards both women and sexual minorities are very condescending and judgmental. In those areas, I think Paul misses the mark, and his reflections are not faithful to the radical inclusiveness of the gospel of Jesus. However, where Paul has stunning wisdom is in his reflections on what it takes to develop a Christian character and what it means to be a healthy Christian community. And while there are many possible choices on this theme in the writings of Paul, I picked a passage from the end of Paul's letter to the church in Philippi for us to consider this morning. And one of the lines that really grabbed me in this translation of Paul's words was this one. Make it as clear as you can to all you meet that you're on their side, working with them and not against them. Make it as clear as you can to all you meet that you're on their side, working with them and not against them. My immediate reaction was, yes, that's how I want to be in relationship with people. I want to be the kind of person who is an ally, who builds people up, who encourages, supports, and seeks to help people be fully and authentically themselves as much as is possible in any given moment. That's who I want to be. And when I complain about other people behind their back, no matter what my reason, I am not being that kind of person. If I am tearing people down, even when they are not present, perhaps especially when they are not present, then I am not working with them, and they should not trust me. I don't think this means that we should not be honest about the challenges we face in relating to other people. It's not always easy to get along with everyone. And in some circumstances, we might even want to collaborate with trusted people on how to best work with a relationship dynamic that we find difficult. And it certainly doesn't mean that we cannot have conversations with people to set boundaries and to find ways to relate to one another that are life-giving for everyone. What it does mean is that my grumbling about my annoyances with other people is not faithful to the kind of relationship I want to cultivate in the world. I think one of the big aha moments this week was that complaining about other people can be as destructive to relationships as gossip, in a very similar sort of way. When I complain to my wife or a friend about a situation which is annoying me, I am seeking to bond with that person at the expense of the relationship with the person whose behavior has annoyed me. There can be this lovely, delicious feeling of complicity in sharing our complaints about a third party who isn't there. Moreover, such sharing can get in the way of doing the actual work we need to do to address the situation. Sometimes, maybe even most of the time, my complaints reveal more about me and my state of being than the person I'm trying to complain about. Remember last Lent when we talked about buttons? Well, for me, complaining about something can be a cue that my button has been pushed. And sharing that complaint with someone else can be a way of avoiding dealing with my own buttons. It can be a way of letting myself off the hook for my own inner work that I need to do. And it can also be a way to avoid the tough work of building healthy relationships with other people. It can seem easier in that moment to just vent my frustration to a third party rather than doing the work of setting a boundary with someone or working towards mutual understanding and respect with people whose ways of doing things are vastly different from my own. But if I want to be the kind of person who builds up other people and is trustworthy in relationship, then I can't complain about people behind their back. The second important point Paul makes is around what to do with worry. He says, take it to God in prayer. Let God know what is in your heart and mind. Let God know what you need or want. And for many of the things I want to complain about, prayer is an excellent starting place. When I perceive that something is wrong in my life, in my community, and in the world, stopping first to pray about it can help to put my concern in its proper perspective. It is not a bad thing to notice things that need to change or things that are not the way we wish they could be. In fact, it can be a very transformative thing. Nothing would ever change if no one had a vision of how it could be different. The challenge with complaining about the way things are is that it focuses our energy on what is wrong and what needs to be different, not on what we want to do about that or how something might change. Taking our complaints first to God in prayer can help us to see where transformative action is possible. How can we fit into God's wholeness, as Paul puts it? And even if we don't have answers, prayer can help us to transform our complaint into a question. Usually, a question is much more open-ended than a complaint. It invites conversation and the exploration of possible solutions. A complaint just tends to get people's back up. We want to defend ourselves against what can feel like an accusation, even if the complaint is true, perhaps especially if the complaint is true. Questions offer a greater possibility of people finding ways to work together for good. The third point Paul makes is about the importance of what we focus our attention on. He writes, "Summing it all up, friends, I'd say you'll do best by filling your minds and meditating on things true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious. The best, not the worst. The beautiful, not the ugly. Things to praise, not things to curse." And while it can be easy to forget this, the truth is that we notice what we're paying attention to. If we pay attention to the worst, the ugly, the things to curse, all the things we want to complain about, that is what we will notice. On the other hand, if we fill our minds and hearts with what is good, beautiful, and worthy of praise, that is also what we will see. Just like in the exercise I invited the kids to do earlier, all of us can probably find things to complain about in all aspects of our lives, but we can also find things to be thankful about in those very same places. If we spend more time noticing the problems and the troubles than the blessings and the possibilities, then the problems and the troubles will seem more important. Of course, an important caution is in order. Sometimes the argument that we should focus on the good is used to justify turning away from injustice and not noticing the oppression of others, particularly if we are people of privilege who have the luxury of looking the other way. While it is painful and ugly to notice and name such social ills as racism, sexual harassment, human rights violations, and environmental degradation, the desire to focus on the positive is not an excuse not to pay attention to the genuine problems in our world. Similarly, sometimes we use the argument that it is better to focus on the positive to deny ourselves the right to feel sorrow or grief or pain or anger. And that is not helpful or faithful either. There are moments when my own heart feels heavy with the grief and struggle that many in our community are experiencing. That's not a complaint. I would not have it any other way. It's just a statement about the reality of being fully human and the fact that we are called to rejoice and to cry together as a community of faith. I would hate for Paul's words about focusing on the good to mean that anyone thought they couldn't bring their whole selves here, grieving and wounded, struggling and afraid. Bring all of that to God and bring all of that with you to church. Heck, come into my office to complain if you need to. Then perhaps, by God's grace, we will be able to transform lament into dancing. As I conclude my week of giving up complaining and prepare with fear and trepidation to move into my week of giving up the fear of failure, yes, I'm aware of the irony, I am glad of the invitation that this week has offered me to think about the role of complaining in my life. I hope that I will complain a little less. I don't think I will stop complaining entirely. And I'm not even entirely sure if I want to, or that it would be beneficial to never complain. But I will try to bring a new attentiveness to the places where my complaining is getting in the way of my relationships or skewing my perception of reality. For that, I am truly grateful. Thanks be to God.